first question. Got it. Oh, I've got a consent. All right, so here we are, and I'm so pleased to be speaking with you. And I have a question for you. What is the difference between messaging and a pitch?
If a pitch is done correctly, it is actually not a pitch, it's a conversation. So messaging is, at least in the way that I think about it, Kathleen, messaging can be interpreted simply as broadcasting, saying who you are and what you are about. But a pitch, when it's really done right, creates engagement. It creates a conversation. And that means that if you're looking in the direction of, well, how can I create a powerful pitch? You need to look at, well, how do I know if I've crafted a pitch that works? And the way that it works is if you create a dialogue, if you create that tell me more. And so crafting your message into a pitch means considering how your pitch is really the start of a conversation. Because in this day and age, at least the way it looks to me, people don't necessarily want to be pitched in an old school way. They want to engage in a conversation and in a dialogue.
And yet sometimes there's not the opportunity to do that. So the pitch has to work on its own. So I have worked with a few top speakers in North America, well, in other continents as well, in terms of creating their pitch in a way, or their message. I would call it their message for a keynote speech. Because you'd be surprised at some of the stuff I get from very, very credible, very talented people. And yet their first line makes me want to take a nap, right? Like an effective way, how to create an effective organization. Oh, ouch, right? So I think a pitch, the difference in a pitch is that it really evokes action. Would that be fair?
I couldn't agree with you more. That's right. The difference between a message or a presentation and a pitch is that a pitch is compelling. It inspires action, 100%. Yes.
So you must be having the most fun of anyone in the world. I mean, how creative is your work, right?
No 2 days are the same and no two clients are the same. But it's
right.
But the common thread is that everyone needs to be able to be persuasive, to create the kind of engagement and dialogue that we want, and to be able to share a message in a way that makes the story compelling. That's really the challenge, right?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, because if you can animate what you say, whether it's a pitch or a keynote speech title, if you can't stir up the other party, you're not going anywhere, no matter what you've got to offer. You just won't get anywhere, right?
Absolutely true. Yeah. And that's a big thing, with the writing that I do. I mean, in the books that I've created and things like that, you always want to look in the direction of what it is that people want and need, but describing that in a way that doesn't cause people to yawn or go to sleep. That's the key. That's really the challenge, because it's not enough to just look in the direction of outcomes. We can all speak about the outcomes that a keynote can produce. It's describing those outcomes in a way that people say instantly, I get that, I want that, tell me more. That's the part that we look for.
And it's not necessarily rational, right? Because we are not rational beings. So it's always first with the heart or the emotions. Sometimes I'll create titles that are a little scary, right? Because that evokes emotion, at least. And they say, oh, okay, I'm perfectly safe, right? So I'll read on, but at least you've got their attention.
You're talking about being provocative.
Yeah.
I think that's a very powerful thing.
It really works.
And I encourage the clients that I work with, and those clients show up on television shows like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank here in the US. And I encourage people to look at those ideas and themes that connect us all, and to share them in a way that is provocative, that is thought-provoking, not challenging, as you said. I mean, you said it very well. you don't want to make people feel unsafe, but you do want to make them think, and leveraging their own thinking in the conversation means that it's not all up to you. If you can do what I'm describing. And a lot of times as keynote speakers, we think, well, it's all up to us. We just have to lift the world by ourselves. And sometimes that lift gets a lot easier when we can engage the thinking of others. And we fall into a trap. And I'm talking, when I say we, I mean me, I mean all people everywhere. We fall into this trap of thinking that the facts speak for themselves. And
no,
it's not true. It's not true.
I'm not going to read your resume. Thanks.
And who
I really don't care. Some of the top speakers have very little education.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It just depends on what you say up there. I worked with a guy who was a naval seaman, and he was asked when he was on a ship at 24 years old to do a rescue of a plane that had of the passengers in a plane that had fallen into the ocean, and he couldn't see anything, so he thought it must be a small plane. It was Air India. It was the Air India crash, and it was not a rescue. I mean, it was a recovery. And so he's a powerful speaker. He learned so much, and he speaks from the heart about what he learned and how these kinds of terrorist events can be prevented, like where the safety measures fell down at the airport and so on. So I think that it so matters that you are one with your message, that you really feel your message, you really care about it, and you really own it, don't you think?
Absolutely true. And I think you point out something that, just in the way that you told that story, there is that there's a reveal, there's a twist, there's something unexpected that makes audiences lean in.
Mm-hmm.
And that without a real connection and an identity surrounding your story, that twist or turn can feel like a gimmick, or it can feel manipulative, quite frankly. But when it's authentic and it's true from the speaker and it's true from the story, there is an opportunity to connect with the audience and connect at a very human level, which is much more powerful than a factual level or a historical level. I mean, Kathleen, I like to think that there's two kinds of language. One is descriptive language, right? Which is describing something, talking about your background. That's what the news reports are. It's descriptive and it describes, and that's always important in a keynote. But there's also language that is compelling, language that I call the language of creation, where you're creating a relationship with the audience. You're creating the engagement that we've been speaking about in this conversation, where you're creating something. You're looking towards agreements. You're looking in the direction of new opportunities, new creativity, new explorations. And I think that kind of language, particularly for speakers or speakers bureaus that are trying to connect with clients, speaking in the language of creation is so much more compelling. At least that's how it looks to me.
But it's also contagious, right? And so if I tell you a story, then you're going to make the story your own. You're going to create your own visuals, because I tend to use a lot of metaphors, because they're very lively language. You don't want to overdo it, but you're going to create your own vision. So if I tell you a story about this person or that person, you're going to imagine them. So therefore, the story and the vision becomes your own. And the top speaker I ever heard was a Canadian lawyer who talked about conditions within Guantanamo, to a sold out luncheon of about people who paid $100 each to go. And he came up to the podium, and he read his notes. He had all sheaf of papers, and it was just blah, 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 blah for 3 pages. Like I was so anxious for him. I thought, oh my God, this is not a good audience to lose, right? I mean, very influential people, lots of press. And then on page 4, he stopped caring about whether the audience agreed with him or not, because his topic was quite controversial. And he just spoke from the heart. And he just took us into hell, basically, by talking about what it was like in there. And I'm not going to say I felt comfortable all the time, but I'll tell you, there's no way I could have, my legs wouldn't have carried me out of the room. I was just so riveted by his honest, direct approach. And the fact that he was so innocent of, hand gestures and all that actually made it more powerful. He got the most rousing standing ovation I've ever seen.
Extraordinary. Was that the authenticity, the raw authenticity that was in
the raw authenticity? I'm not here to prove anything. I'm no big shot. I'm just a person who cares about how other people are treated. That's all. Wow. And the bravery of him to walk in there, right, on his own time, do over and over again. Yeah. So, but he was Scottish. When Scottish are passionate, I'll tell you, they are passionate, so it really, really was powerful.
Well, accessing passion, that's central to any pitch, because it has to be something that you connect with and something that connects with your audience at that passionate level. Or you could even say it just at a very human level. And it sounds like that was what this guy's superpower was, just coming in there and being a very real, very authentic human being, and stepping away from the artifice and maybe the things that other more practiced speakers might rely on. He didn't have those tools. It sounds like it made it even more powerful.
You wouldn't think a lawyer would be a great speaker, but he wasn't trying, you see. He just was feeling, and he expressed that, and he was just outraged, and he kind of contained that, but we could feel it. And so we were outraged along with him. But some speeches I find can be so carefully crafted. I know you know your way around this, that they're manipulative and they just are so annoying. So can you tell me something about that? How do you relate to that? Because you've run into it for sure,
Well, and I work with my clients around it, clients that I'm working with in terms of media coaching and going on television shows and that sort of thing. You can't fall back on tricks. You can't fall into old habits if you want to create new results. And relying on folks that rely on manipulation to create results are doing so because they don't have the ability to access the kind of authenticity that you found so powerful in the lawyer's presentation you described. Yeah. And I think today's speakers now more than ever have to be willing to step into that place of authenticity, that sort of transparency. And the speakers that I admire are the ones that they go to what I call the edge of balance, where they're not always in control of their gestures in the room. That's not to say that things become chaotic, but there's a level of vulnerability that comes into the conversation where the audience doesn't really know what's going to happen next. And from that place, that's where the real learning happens. And that's where people start thinking on their own and becoming more a part of the story. But in order to create that space, I think that speakers need to be willing to tap into that kind of authenticity and vulnerability. And it's not enough to just say, I'm going to be transparent with you. It's not something you can say. It's something you have to show, because the audience has to experience it, not listen to you describe it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah. The audience has to really hear it. I mean, they have to identify with whatever it is you're talking about. And so your personal story is important to them. But I think you have to have a balance, because it is not, at the end of the day, all about you, right?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think that the best speeches are very rarely, the best speeches have little to do with the speaker. And that may sound outrageous, especially for some of the speakers that you've represented, and their personal story is so much a part of the keynote. But it's the way that the story of one becomes the story of all of us. Excuse me, I said that wrong. The story of one of us becomes the story of all of us.
Great. Yeah. No, that's quite true. That's quite true. One of my speakers who always gets a standing ovation talks about his son who died a few years ago, but he had muscular dystrophy. And of course, the father was so distressed, and there was nothing he could do for his son, really. There was no cure. And so he walked his son from Newfoundland to his home in London, Ontario. And
oh, that's a walk. Wow.
That's a walk. Yeah. And then after that, he had to take his son home because the weather wasn't good. So then he went to Vancouver and walked from Vancouver to his home again. So he walked all the way across Canada. And all he has to do is show the video of him walking and walking, which is so touching, and just talk from his heart about why it matters and why we need to care more about donating to charities and so on. And he gets standing ovation every time, because businessmen in particular are not necessarily used to hearing that message. And so he does them a favor by stirring up their emotions and touching their heart. At work. Imagine that. Oh, well, imagine that, right?
We need more of that. I think we need more heart in our work, especially in these times of isolation and division. The ability to hear a story that connects us all, even if we haven't. I mean, what a unique experience, right? Walking across Canada, that's extraordinary. But
yeah.
But to be able to take that unique, isolated experience and create a connection with the audience, a connection with a commitment that could lead you to walk from Newfoundland to British Columbia and points in between. It's extraordinary. Yeah. But the really extraordinary part of that story is that the story of one of us can be the story of all of us in the hands of a gifted speaker.
Oh, because we're all walking with him, you see?
Right.
And just seeing the ordinary people. So there's something about ordinary people which is quite compelling. To see the ordinary people just giving him nickels and dimes on the way, right, was so touching. And some of them bringing their own children who had disabilities to see it. I mean, it was just very, very touching. But, yeah. So I want to ask you also, when did you realize that you had an extraordinary gift?
I'm gonna say something that probably isn't going to come across the right way, but I have always felt that I was gifted in some way or another. But I've spent a lifetime trying to figure out how to share those gifts, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And I think when it comes to, helping people with their pitches and that sort of thing, I mean, of course, the recognition that I received as the U.S. National Elevator Pitch Champion, that obviously helped spur me on that journey and added notoriety that it, attracted clients from around the world and that kind of thing. But more than just notoriety or accolades, just like the story of the man who walked back and forth across Canada, it's what you do with your journey and who joins you on it that makes it special. And having gifts is great, but the way that we share our gifts is what makes them meaningful. And I'm fortunate. I mean, this is one of the things that I love about being a keynote speaker, is that I get to share my experiences and observations in a way that doesn't isolate my experience, but allows me to, if I do it right, connect my experiences and my observations to others in the spirit of service, which I also think is a part of great keynotes. And I think a great pitch, that spirit of service, that difference that you make and being very clear about it, can make even the ordinary folks giving donations, ordinary becomes extraordinary.
Well, it does. And the world is made up of ordinary people, right? And we're all ordinary and we're all extraordinary in some ways. So, and so I think that what is great about the work you do and the work I do is that it's constant learning, right? Because every client must be different.
Absolutely.
So I work with speakers. I don't do a lot of it because I run a bureau, so that's my main thing. But I do work with a few speakers and on their messaging because I just can't bear it. Right? They send me. I know they're so gifted, and they send me stuff that oh my god, you don't ever say individual. You never say effective. I mean, awful words. So, but I'm always learning from them because everyone's different. I'm sure it's true for you too.
Indeed. But there are certain words that serve more than others. And I can tell that just talking to you that you are a lover of words and words matter to you. And
totally.
You know, when someone shows up and they're talking about themselves and they're using a word like synergy in polite conversation, it's just not it doesn't pass the laugh test. Sometimes the most powerful pitch and the most powerful keynote isn't filled with flowery language, but it's plain spoken and heartfelt and spoken in a way where simplicity drives the authenticity of the message. Because one of the things that I say when it comes to a pitch, the simplest message is the strongest. And people fight me on this. They're like, no, it needs to be complex. It needs to be dense. I need to demonstrate my master craftsmanship and command of the English language. And I couldn't disagree more, because if you're demonstrating how great you are, you're missing, or how vast your vocabulary is, you're missing an opportunity to connect, to serve, to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, and to create real value in your pitch, in your keynote. It starts, and this is counterintuitive, but it starts when you look at the simplicity of your message, not making it simplistic, but getting down to the essence of who you are and how your story is going to serve. It's not really a grammar exercise. It's an exercise in heart.
It's not necessarily an exercise of how many degrees you have either, because like that makes me go to sleep. Right? I need a nap. BA, PhD, this, that, and this university and that university. And oh, stop already. It's like, I really want to know what you can deliver to me, right? And what you have to say. Because if you're swamped with academic criteria, then that really kind of stands in your way, I think, to some extent.
To some extent, I think anytime you're looking at your background and trying to use the letters behind your name to make a point, I think you're missing the point. The point is not what you've done, but what you can do for others because of your experience. And quite frankly, audiences, in my experience, they don't care. They don't care where I went to school. They don't care what I did for the group in Florida last month. They don't care about that. They want to know, what can you do for me now? And how are you focused on my objectives? And that, I think, is central as well to an expressive pitch, is your ability to focus on the objectives of the audience and of the client. Because at the end of the day, where you went to school or your experience might get you in the door, but it's how you express value to the client that's going to get the applause or the standing ovation at the end of your keynote. In
a relatable way. You give your message in a relatable way. So that's really quite true. I mean, I find when I'm working with a client from England, I really have to work on the language, because it's just a different culture where they're more conservative in terms of what they say, and they feel that that's more professional, and I feel that it's less professional, to be honest, right? Or certainly less magnetic. Let's put it that way. I don't know about professional, but certainly less magnetic, and it's less likely to sell because it just sounds like, oh, what the person before sent me, right?
So true.
It's not going to be different. Yeah. So you've got to be fresh and you've got to be different. And your work must be so much fun.
It is. I love it. I work with folks in a wide variety of professions. I work with people who want to go in front of the media. I work with corporations. I'm doing a training program right now, working with high potential employees, and this is an online program that I'm doing. So it's not necessarily doing keynote speaking. It's coaching, where I'm creating videos and doing coaching sessions to help people to explore how to communicate in a way that is exactly what we're describing: passionate, compelling, inclusive, helping people to feel comfortable with being vulnerable and transparent, and not relying on corporate speak to convey their message. Because, you know, we think what you were saying is so true. You want to be magnetic. You do not want to stand out by creating a conversation that conforms. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. And you want to be magnetic, but you want to be vulnerable. And so if you get up and do a speech where you're on top of everything and you know everything and you've never made a mistake and you've never had a difficult time in your life,
then I think you're a liar, is what I think.
Yeah, really, seriously. Well, you're sure not telling me the whole story, right?
Right.
And people think that that's negative. It's not negative views. It's called life. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all need to do that. I did that once. I gave a speech back in the days when I thought I might be interested in speaking. And when the bottom fell out of the writing market, I started to deliver my information in speeches, and gave a speech to a group of the National Sales Association. And then at the end of the speech, I mean, it was well received. It was an okay speech, but something told me to tell them a personal story. Just something said, "You're not finished yet." And I did, about my son having a breakdown when he was at university, and how we dealt with that. And the head of the association came up to me afterwards and said, when my son comes home from university, I'm going to make sure that I really check in with him and talk to him and see how he's doing, right? And it made a difference. They will never forget that little short story because it was powerful. The thing about stories is you'll remember them till the day you die.
So true.
Because they're part of you now. They're not my story anymore. Oh, wow. Because I'm with her when she's going through this, and wow, she just said the right thing accidentally. Wow. So yeah, people internalize it. And that's when you've got a winner.
Agree. I think that and this is the coaching that I provide to the folks that I work with who are interested in crafting a powerful pitch. Where's the story? Where's the connection? Where's the humanity? And that's not to say that people have to expose every secret or nuance or sin. Although, it's not a confession, but having the courage to say, I don't have all the answers, can actually, and this is counterintuitive, but it's actually a place of great strength because the audience says and sees that you are human.
Yeah. And that you're honest.
Correct. Because if you try to present yourself the minute you try to stand on stage and present yourself as a guru, there are people in the audience that cross their arms and they make it a pet project to never believe you. Yeah. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that they should, because what looks like a more realistic story and a more compelling story to me is that we are all fellow travelers on a journey and we all have different perspectives. One client of yours walked from Newfoundland to BC and saw everything on that journey and shared it in a keynote. Does that make him better or worse? It's just different and unique and a powerful perspective, a perspective worth sharing and a perspective worth listening to. And when your credentials are discussed in terms of not here's what I've done, but because of this experience, here's what I can do for you. Here's what we might be able to create together. That's what my keynotes are very interactive, Kathleen. I tell people, I said, look, I'm going to talk to folks in the audience. I'm not going to, it's not like a hypnotist act or anything like that, but I do walk out typically when I can. And I ask questions of the audience because I want them to know that I'm not the sage on the stage. I mean, I can be if you want me to be, but at the end of the day, the place where I feel most comfortable is in stepping into that identity that I'm passionate about, the identity that is based on creating new results, an identity that's based on service, an identity that helps people to see things in new ways, not because I'm some sort of guru, but because I want to share in their journey and be not a guru, but a catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
Creates that change in the room. And sometimes in order to make sure that that change is taking place, I ask the audience some questions, and they, as opportunities to speak live and in person are increasing, I'm finding that people are really drawn to that, really interested in sharing. And that certainly is the case when I do virtual presentations. I always want to make sure. I did an event for Intel recently, and for their entire workforce. I mean, I think there were 1,500 people on and it was a Zoom event, or no, I said Zoom. They do Microsoft Teams. But when I would ask a question of the group, I had to have someone on the call with me to monitor the chat, because it would just blow up hundreds of responses. And
Wow.
yeah. And I'd like to say it's because my questions are so pithy that no, they are, they're pretty good. But it's because people are hungry for this kind of interaction.
Yeah.
And I think that a pitch has to point in that direction of how can your pitch be an invitation to interact, not where you're going to speechify people or stun people with the letters behind your name or your academic achievements, but how can you present your ideas as an invitation to take some sort of step that's easy and that is in the best interest of the audience. That's what makes it really powerful.
Yeah, that's totally true. And I have heard people tell their own story to a detriment, right? I mean, go on and weep on stage, and that's just self-indulgent. And I kind of get on all fours and crawl out of the room when that happens.
I know that
because you can't interrupt someone when they're telling their own story, and so they can really go on, and it becomes very self-indulgent. So it's just unprofessional, but most speakers don't do that. So another question I have for you is, what is it that you speak to about organizations? Because as a bureau, I'd be very interested in representing you, but I'm not sure how to pitch you, right? So probably you could help with that. Yeah. So how is it you present yourself to an organization?
Every organization is looking for ways to access better leadership. And the key to leadership, to me, is effective communication. And companies are struggling with how do we communicate effectively, and how do we work with remote teams? What about this hybrid work environment? How do we not favor the people that are in the office, but they're in the office? Aren't they doing more than the people who are at home? Not necessarily. Mm-hmm. So how do we facilitate and add to that kind of connection? I mean, the book that you were drawn to, for me, when talking about the pitch, was the first one that I wrote. It's back there behind me, the new elevator pitch. But the book that companies are most interested in is this one, Leadership Language. Okay. And that's what organizations are looking for, is how can we create greater connection with our customers, connection with our employees, and how can we, for example, how can we navigate difficult conversations? What is the approach to a corrective conversation? How do we correct employees without having them go off the reservation, or worse, quit? Yeah. What can be done and said to create greater engagement? And in my keynotes, I step organizations through a simple process that empowers everyone in the audience to see things in a new way, because my material isn't personality specific, right? Doesn't matter what your DISC profile is. Doesn't matter whether you're an engineer. Yeah, good. Right?
Who cares?
Well, some organizations do, but I mean, that's why I speak to. I mean, I speak to hairdressers, I speak to engineers, I speak to scientists and PhDs and folks that maintain parking lots. I mean, it's a very, very broad audience that I serve. Why? Because everyone needs to know how to communicate more persuasively. And when they do, sales go up, employees stick around, new employees are attracted to your organization, and you're able to convey your vision in a way that's not just some slogan on a wall or some mission statement that people give lip service to.
Yeah.
It's the authentic conversation that you and I are talking about right here. Just put it on stage and create that kind of understanding for an organization. And like I say, I mean, recently one event that I did was 2 hours, and it was for a College of Nursing. So it was all nurses and medical professionals talking about how to communicate more effectively. And in that environment, when they gave me 2 hours, we were able to put things on their feet. We were able to do a lot more interactivity. And so people can actually experience and demonstrate new skills. And sometimes some organizations are like, oh, I don't know if our people will do that. And I'm like, well, let's give it a try. And what you find is rabid enthusiasm to try new things, especially when they see their peers, when the audience sees their peers achieving and accomplishing things and doing it instantly. I mean, the things that I share, it doesn't require, 6 weeks to process these things. It's stuff that people can see and grasp and demonstrate. And that's a very long answer to a short question.
No, that's a really great and very thorough answer, and it gives me a clear sense of it. How many engagements do you do per year in terms that you would call speaking engagements as opposed to training?
That's a good question. I would say probably this year I'll be between 50 and 60. My top was I did 72 in 20.
Oh, good grief! Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot.
In 2018.
2018. Yeah. So that was back, when.
Yeah, before all hell broke loose. Right?
Yeah. And when I say 50 to 60, the majority of those, certainly early in the year, virtual, all online, that kind of course. So. Right.
Well, but nice that you were able to make this switch, because it basically gave you a lot of time, by not having to travel and so on, because 70 a year, if you're traveling to each one, that's quite grueling.
It was brutal. And it took a toll on my family. And that was part of why I said I made a conscious choice to ratchet it back. There are some speakers out there that they're like, if I'm not away from home 200 nights a year, I'm not happy. I'm not that guy.
No,
I love my wife and love my family and want to spend time with them. So,
well, you love your health as well. And you serve no one if you burn out. Right. And it will sneak up on you, and you may think you're fine, but you're not, right? So you've got to watch for that. And I'm sure you're much in demand. So that's really great. We can have another talk about representation if that's something you're interested in. You're represented with other bureaus, I would assume.
Yes, that's right. But I'm always interested in more representation. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. My market is more Canadian than US, but it's diverse. I mean, this is across countries as most are. And I think that that virtual is going to be with us for a while, because as I said in my newsletter, there's great liability waiting for people who have to cancel their hotel venue. And, you put down your 50%, meeting planners put down 50% up front a year ahead to hold the hotel. And if they change, they may lose that. And then they have to be responsible for it, which is tough. So I think there'd be a certain caution, and we'll just see how things go. And different countries are going to be more cautious. And the US is probably going to be more bold, because that's the kind of country it is, right?
For better or for worse, I think that's
for better or for worse. Who can say? Right? There's better and worse in everything, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying, Kathleen. I think that I had an event, a large event in Las Vegas that was supposed to happen at the end of this month, pushed back to the spring of 2022, and I think that
makes perfect sense. And they're planning for it now.
Sure. And I'm sure whatever deposits the client put down, I'm sure they shifted them to the event in April, and all is well.
Yeah. So. And that's smart, because it doesn't do for hotel venues to annoy their clients, right? So they've got to make some deal. I was about to go to Phoenix when I canceled my reservation 2 days ahead, and they just gave me a voucher for the next trip, right? So, I mean, they just have to accommodate, period, right?
They have to, yeah.
So it mitigates the risks for meeting planners, but it's going to be a very, very, very interesting market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love doing virtual events. Everybody gets a front row seat. And with my virtual events, we make them very interactive, and so that it's not just a traditional talking head kind of thing. I mean, I've got all kinds of, I use, simple note cards and things like that. And
that's profound.
Yes, it is. Let's slow down.
It's illuminating.
I've got all kinds of just little, what needs to be done. I don't know. These are just.
Oh, that's great.
But they're things to, and people don't expect it. And that's not to say that I don't know how to use PowerPoint or an iPad or whatever. But, sometimes when you hold, this is what we were talking about before. This is a silly drawing that I did. This is so cool. And I just sketched out real quick. But the point is, why do I hold up stuff like this? Because this is real. I'm not trying to be, a patio Picasso here. This is me drawing an image right here, right now. So it's the virtual keynote is like, it's almost like a cooking show. You get to watch the chef in the kitchen. And it keeps it real. And do I have, dazzling slides? Sure. But you know what? Is there really such a thing as dazzling slides? I think people are there for the story, and I think that they're there for people who are willing to be real. And
well, like the pitch, there are slides that are provocative and interesting, but dazzling, no. Yeah, we get tired of them.
I think so. Yeah. Sometimes you need to put some information on there that's hard hitting, and you need to lay some facts out there. But if those facts don't come in the context of a story, and they are not accompanied by a passionate, emotional connection, the audience doesn't take the journey, in my experience.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you leave them behind, and there you are blathering away. Right.
Right. Yeah. You're up there pontificating on the stage, and it truly is a one-man show. I'm not interested in that.
So the truth is, I used to teach English as a second language, and I worked with refugees. And what I learned from teaching English was that you watch the eyes. You can see when they disengage. It's really interesting how revealing our eyes are, don't you think?
The windows to the soul. That's true.
They are. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You can tell when people are not there, right? And it's kind of scary.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And sometimes that's why I like sometimes to be in rooms where the lights are on, where you can see the audience, where it's not, where the lights aren't facing you and that sort of thing. And I also like virtual environments, even though it might be a webinar format where people can only be seen and heard in the chat, but still, having that chance to, again, anything we can do to connect, and the eyes are that place of connection. Absolutely true.
Yeah. It's a real gauge. You know how you're doing, and when people turn their eyes off and they're sitting there, but they're not really present in their bodies, then that may happen in one or two people. But if it happens to more than that, then you've got to do something to spice things up, and you've got to change your speech basically next time you go out, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you get rave reviews for your work.
I have been very fortunate. I've been very blessed with the clients that I've worked with. And I wish I could say that it's due to my brilliance, but look, the stuff that I talk about, it's science. It's like the law of gravity. It works based on principles. And when you share those principles and people see it for themselves and see that they are capable and that they have capacity that they didn't realize, there's a resourcefulness that comes into the room, comes into the conversation, and I am, the story comes through me, if that makes sense, Kathleen. That's really what I strive for. And, I work hard, and I create my, I do my homework, and I have my slides and my intentions and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I am there to serve the audience. And I've been fortunate that they've responded to that service in a way that's been really powerful.
And you want to do that as effectively and as largely as you are able, right? Because you do have an extraordinary gift. I mean, when I saw your email, I thought, who does that? And then I thought, what fun is that, right? But also pressure. So you must have had a couple of clients from, well, I mean, a couple of clients that were difficult to work with. And you must have had some extraordinary clients that just fueled you as well, right?
Indeed. I'm always amazed at what my clients are capable of. And some of them are capable of arguing with me and not seeing well thought out ideas that I present to them, Kathleen, but but we push on. You know, it's so funny that one of the things that I share is that a pitch, when you boil it down, is really a series of yeses, which is, that's not the best English in the world. I'm speaking with a former English teacher. I apologize. But
no,
it's
that's
a
perfect.
series of
No, that's true.
positive responses.
Yeah.
People say yes.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that yes often lives in the land of no. And you have to get comfortable with the fact that people may not necessarily see what it is that you're on about. They may not necessarily agree with what it is that you're sharing, but there is an art and a science to talking about things that are inarguable. And so many times as speakers, we want to go into the nuanced world where we provide an audience a reason to argue rather than a reason to agree. And I look for those places, but you know, Kathleen, I'm not going to say, and that's why I win every argument. That's why I win every fight. And that's why my wife always, no, come on. That's not real.
No, of course not. It shouldn't be.
But we have to try. We owe it to ourselves to understand what gives us the best potential to succeed in conveying our ideas, conveying our vision. Yeah. And that's where I look. And
often meeting in the middle, right? When people have different perspectives, you have to meet in the middle and sometimes agree to disagree as well.
So true. Yeah, I call that satisficing, right? Where you come, you know, it will suffice and it satisfies maybe not everything that you wanted in the world, but it's satisficing, and it's that middle ground that you're talking about.
And you both left with a broken noses kind of thing. So that's good.
Right. Nobody was worse off.
Right. In today's world, that's a good thing, right? It's so amazing. So one final question for you. Yes. What's next for you?
Well, what's next for me is I have my second book coming out from Wiley in December, and it's unlike anything that I've ever written before.
Oh, how exciting.
And yeah, what I pitched to Wiley is a book, 100 ways to create personal freedom and conquer the future of work. And they were like, wow, this is great. And I started getting into it and I thought, this is not a book that I want to write. It's
funny how it shows up, right?
Well, back to what I was saying before, it kind of comes through me.
If that it does.
And that wasn't the book that needed to come through me, but the book that I ended up writing is actually based on a conversation between a client and a coach. And in the course of this conversation, they come up with 60, not 100, but 60 ways to find personal freedom and make everything easier. And that actually that's the title of the book. It's Easier, Creating Your World Your Way. And the idea is that everything in life can be easier. Maybe not easy, but there is an easier way to go about everything that you're on about, whether that is building airplanes or doing a liver transplant or pitching your business idea to Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank. There is an easier way. And this book looks at how to make everything easier. So it's a dialogue, it's a conversation. It is the book that I needed to write. It's the book that I need to read. It's really very interesting. I'm really excited about it.
Well, it sounds really exciting. It's both simple and profound. And what I find is that we are all geniuses at pulling a boulder out of the pile and putting it right in front of our path and then saying, well, listen, Chris, look at this. I mean, how would you expect me to move forward? I mean, seriously, look at that big boulder. No one could walk in front of that. And then you tell your wife, and she tells her friends, and now you've got a whole committee saying, well, Kathleen can't move forward because look at that boulder. But who put it there? I did. Right? We do that over and over and over again. There is no one who hasn't done that. What disturbs me more about doing that is that we don't realize it. And we get a committee to agree with us that we don't have enough money. We certainly can't afford this. We couldn't possibly go there. We would never dare to do this, right? We do it all the time and block ourselves over and over again and try and legitimize the blocking, right?
So true. We find a support mechanism for ideas that don't need to be supported. In fact, they're constructs of products of our own imagination, our own creation. So, and it's funny that you're saying that, Kathleen, because that's one of the central themes in the book, Easier, is that hard is a habit, and we make things hard. But is there another way? And that's what the coach strives to share with the client. It is not his way, but looking at things in a perspective that allows for people to zoom out. Because like if you're standing right in front of the boulder, you go, I'll never get away from this. I can't get past this. There's no way around it. You have to zoom out. You have to step back. You have to see that it's just a boulder. You can get around it, that there are ways around it. There might even be a way for you to climb up onto it and over it. Yep. But this inability to zoom out is so often what makes these boulders that aren't made of rock. They're not even made of paper mache. They're made of thought.
Yeah.
When we zoom out, we see new perspectives that can really serve us, rather than create a support group around a hypothetical that's really no one, that's in service to no one.
Right, because the support group kind of cements it in, right?
Right. It makes it more real and more intimidating and more scary.
Well, they'll push back if you try and move around it. Oh no, you'll hurt yourself. Seriously, they have an investment in your dysfunction. That is pathetic, but it's absolutely true. I've lived through it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I've lived through it, and I had to sell my home and leave my two sons who were in their early 20s and flee from my life just so that no one was telling me who I was. Really, I did.
Really?
But I was doing it to myself. I'm not putting the blame on anyone else, but I was in that situation where I knew that I was going to get really ill if as a single parent, right, and raising kids and struggling financially and so on. So I knew that I was going to get really ill if I didn't do something drastic. And I said, okay, guys, I'm moving to Nova Scotia for a little bit. I'm going to write my book. Wow. And I spent 3 years there. And in the end, I didn't write my book, but I wrote 2 books coming out of Nova Scotia, one about a loyalist and one about the Speaking Association. And I started CAPS, which is our version of NSA, started a branch in Nova Scotia. So like I was being led to go there, and it's good I didn't know what my initial purpose was going to change, because I wouldn't have gone. It would have freaked me out. But it was the best thing I've ever done in my life. Mm. Yeah.
Sounds like you found it.
I just let go of the committee and said, no, I'm not here to make friends or anything. I am just going to be by myself and listen to my intuition and my inner guidance. And then I realized I shouldn't be writing that book, and I should explore starting up a speaking association there. Weird, eh?
Interesting. Well, it's so interesting how your goals, started in one way and they shifted into what they really needed to be, and something actually sounds like even more than what you had imagined. I mean, you imagined that you would write one book. That was your goal. It didn't work out. Actually, it was 2, and association, and it was so many times the universe has bigger plans than what we see, especially when it comes to our goals.
But as long as I was here, I wouldn't get I would get in my way, and I wouldn't allow it. And so like I got the message that, okay, you can stay here and you'll die relatively young, and your children will say, oh my God, like, what was that about? Right? That was so sad. And I wasn't going to do it to them. So I just wasn't going to leave them that legacy of, oh my God, that was sad. No, not now. not now. So yeah, you just have to really, really pay attention to your intuition. And I think that that comes right back to what we're talking about is pitch. Just what's that inner message that you're getting, and are you open to it or not, right?
Indeed. And being able to speak from the heart, not trying to impress,
Yeah. Or manipulate.
Correct. Because you don't want to be admired. You want to be hired. You want to have an opportunity to share your gifts, whatever they may be. Mm-hmm. And the way that you share those gifts, it reminds me of something that when I was first starting out as a speaker, I hired a coach who you may know of. He's a Canadian. His name is Vince Picente. And Vince he was an Olympian. Vince's story is he went from recreational skier to being in the Olympics and representing Canada.
I heard him speak. Yeah.
Fantastic guy. And our kids went to school together, and I knew Vince and everything. And I reached out to him when I was just starting my career. And, I said, Vince, you've been so successful. You're in the Speakers Hall of Fame in your native Canada. You're here in the United States, which is an adopted country, and he's an American citizen as well. And I said, you've done so much. I want to be a speaker. I want to be on as many stages as I possibly can. And he said to me something I've never forgotten. He gave me one word of advice: speak. I go, Vince, what do you mean? He goes, any stage, any audience, any fee. And of course, this is advice to a young speaker, not someone who's later in their career, but to get started, if you want to know what your gifts are and how to share them, share them.
Yeah.
Speak.
Paid, unpaid, never mind. Yeah.
Correct. Go out and help somebody. Go out and transform someone's life. Go out and spend 60 minutes in front of as many people as will listen to you, and share with them your heart, your soul, and your connection to the universe, and change theirs. Mm-hmm. And then, at the very least, you've got some material for your next keynote. Right?
For sure. What not to do.
Perhaps. But we learn by trying. We learn by sharing. We learn what those gifts are. But it's never, the two things that'll screw up any speaker, anytime, anywhere, the two questions you can ask yourself when you're on stage, here they are. Who am I and how am I doing? Mm-hmm. Ask yourself those questions. You have some existential dilemma while you're on stage. Disastrous. Yeah. And if you're speaking about who you are, that's a warning. If you're quoting chapter and verse from your LinkedIn profile, yikes. But also, how am I doing? Wrong place to look, wrong question to ask. How's your audience doing? Yeah. Are their eyes open? Are they locked on you? Are all eyes on you? And are you sharing that vulnerability that is yours and yours alone? Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things. That's where I see the real impact. And that's true in a presentation and true in a pitch. Mm-hmm. Take your attention off of yourself. Speak, share, serve.
I think you have to tune in to how you're feeling during your presentation, because honestly, when I started reading a couple of my presentations back in the day when I was speaking, I was bored. Oh my goodness, if I'm bored, and this is my material, my poor audience. And so I had to take out all those parts, right? So you have to tune into yourself and say, am I giving it my all? Am I completely engaged in this? Because being completely engaged is engaging, period.
Well said. Yeah, that's true. That's true. And connecting with your material. The other thing though, don't you think this is true, Kathleen? Because there's some things that I look at and I go, I've said it 1,000 times, but the audience is hearing it for the first time. Mm-hmm. I always think I owe it to them to make sure that, the last thing anybody wants to hear is a jaded, over-rehearsed speaker.
Totally manipulative. You laugh here, cry there. No, just really, I don't like it one bit. And yet, I heard Dave Chilton speak, and he's the author of The Wealthy Barber, which was a top seller. And he was just so real, and just didn't have a tie on and so on. Just, he was well dressed, but not fancy. So real and so informal and so comfortable with the audience because he was being real, that it was just really gripping. And then the next year I went to another convention and he was on the platform, and I thought, well, I probably don't need to hear him twice. Yes, I did. The same speech, every bit as engaging. I wasn't bored for a moment. He is so real. You just can't be, right? And I've heard another speaker, Alan Weiss, the millionaire consultant, speak twice. Now he's more information, but I am in love with information, and his information is exactly the information I'm looking for. So he gave a speech at CAPS, at a CAPS convention one year, and I just couldn't wait to rush home and change something. I mean, that's very exciting, right? And then the next year he spoke again, and I thought, oh, I'm not so sure. I need to hear the same speech, basically. But I went and I heard it again and really, really thoroughly enjoyed it and got different messages from it. So that is a powerful speaker when that can happen.
Indeed. Absolutely true. That's part of a true pro. You know, that sort of, but isn't that the gig? You got to keep it fresh, and you have to be fresh every time you engage with your material. Because
sure. And if you're animated, you're going to animate me, whether I like it or not, whether I've heard you 3 times or 4. If you're animated, I'll know that, and that will rub off on me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're talking. It's resonance. You're talking about resonance. That vibration, that energy, that is shared energy in the room.
Contagious.
100%. Contagious, as you said earlier. That's right. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely been wonderful talking to you. What a great conversation. And I could talk to you all day, but that was really great. I can't wait for your book to come out. And if you send me the recording of this, that would be great. I will get it transcribed.
Perfect. Let me stop the recording now.
Okay.